Thank you so much. The fact that I have returned to Bolzano quite clearly indicates that I have a special love for both the region and the people of the region. And of course, the theme of this evening is what I have dedicated the last 3 decades of my life to. Not that I had chosen to look at agriculture. I was a typical scientist thinking life was made of equations and solving equations, and that's what I used to do. Till in 1984, the disaster of Bhopal, where a pesticide plant leaked, and the eruption of violence in Punjab, the place where for the first time in a country of the South, chemical agriculture was imposed. It was called the Green Revolution. In Punjab, we had a rise of extremism, violence, 30,000 people killed. And the Green Revolution had been given a Nobel Peace Prize. And I said, there's nothing like peace out here, so I'd better study what's going on. I was at that time doing a major program for the United Nations University on peace and global transformation, on conflicts over resources. And I said to them, something's going on here that's related to natural resources. And I really want to figure this out. So I wrote my book, The Violence of the Green Revolution. And then I realized that I had to spend the rest of my life practicing and promoting an agriculture that was an agriculture of peace and nonviolence. And then, of course, I came to know about the corporations that had brought the chemicals, wanting to own the seed, genetically modify crops. And so I started seed saving. And these are the facts about what's really happening with our food system. The question is, who will feed the world in the future? But the answer to that question depends on who is feeding the world today. Because we have one level of a spin, it's called in English, a story repeatedly told, we feed the world, the giant companies say they feed the world would have starved without them. What's the reality? 1 billion people are going hungry structurally today. Before this, hunger, starvation was temporally located in a particular time and spatially located. It was restricted. Now it's permanent. Those who are hungry whether the rain is good or not good, whether there's peace or war. And that's because of the way industrial chemical agriculture system has evolved. The second aspect of it is that 2 billion people who are eating are falling sick. This is WHO figures on food-related, diet-related diseases, whether it be the epidemics of cancer, hypertension, heart problems, diabetes, obesity, allergies, and even mental health. Because scientists are now finding that you can't talk about the gut as separate from the brain. The gut-brain is one ecosystem. So the first thing that's happened in the last 2 decades is agriculture has been redefined as trade alone, global trade alone. And international trade drives how agriculture will be done. That's why the rules of WTO are so important in shaping agriculture policies all over the world. And tragically, these rules were written by the big corporations. The intellectual property rules of owning seed were written by Monsanto. They're on record saying that. We wrote these rules. The rules of trade were written by Cargill, the world's biggest grain trading giant in the world. So they have reduced seed to intellectual property and food to a commodity. So we have more and more commodities, we have more and more container ships moving around the world, and that's all that gets measured in terms of are we growing more food or not growing more food. But when we really look at how much are people eating and who's eating, It turns out 70% of the food still comes from small farms. Only 30% comes from industrial agriculture. And in industrial agriculture, the two crops that have really exploded in the name of food are corn and soya. You travel Europe, all you see is the same height corn everywhere. You travel all of Latin America, all of Brazil, all of the United States, it's all soya. Are they going to feed people? No, only 10% of the corn and soya grown in the world is directly eaten by human beings. The rest goes for animal feed, which is why Europe imports so much GMO animal feed, and biofuel, because the subsidies are highest for the biofuel sector. So this is a diversion of land and food from the hungry to subsidy-based, driven commodity production. Commodities are not food. The more commodities we have, the more hunger we have. And we watch this in India. India had reached total self-sufficiency in food after independence. Today, it's not Africa, but India, which is the capital of hunger. More hungry people in India. More children severely malnourished in India than Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. Every fourth Indian, as a result of free trade, globalization, whatever you'd like to call it, every fourth Indian is hungry, and every second child is wasted, which means their body weight is small, and they're stunted, which means they're becoming dwarfs, half of India's future generations. Again, this is not a food system that's bringing nourishment to people. Same with Argentina. So much of the soya you get here is from Argentina. Argentina used to be food surplus, big exporter of wheat. Today, they have huge lines for soup kitchens. The more soya has expanded, the more hunger has grown. The second, this kind of commodified, industrialized agriculture, because it's not focusing on nourishment, it's not focusing on rights, it's not focusing on the earth, it is only focusing on how much can you trade long distance. It is imposing a model that creates waste. 50% of the food in industrial agriculture is wasted. A large part in the field because of uniformity. And I'm sure here in your beautiful region, you must have had huge diversity of apples. But as trade takes over, the apples must become the same size. I was told by South Africans that they were told they had to change their apple trees because Walmart had changed the size of its trucks. And so the crates had to fit into the truck, and the apples had to fit into the crate, and what tree will grow on your farm had to be decided by Walmart's trucks, not the people who eat the apple. So you have uniformity measures. They're called sanitary and phytosanitary measures. They have nothing to do with safety. They have everything with commodification and trade. And then because of the long distance transport, 50% of the food is thrown away because of the best before date. And I know Italy has the 11th hour market and all kinds of initiatives to deal with waste. But the system is waste generating. 50% food thrown away is contributing to hunger. The third, food should give us health. Food should give us nourishment. In fact, in our ancient texts, it always said, food is the ultimate medicine. If you eat good food, you don't have disease, you're disease-free. But industrial monocultures, by their very nature, require a lot of chemicals. In any case, the model was driven by chemical companies. Industrial agriculture is shaped by the companies that made chemicals for warfare, and after the war, worked out very clever ways to say without chemicals you can't have food. So chemical fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides. Agriculture doesn't need these chemicals. In fact, the more you use them, the more you need to use them. I call them ecological narcotics. Just like with any addiction, any drug addiction, the more you use it, the more you need to use it. The more pesticides you use, the more friendly insects you kill, the more resistance you create in the pests, the more super pests you get, the more pesticide you must use. 1,200 times more pesticide use since the beginning of pesticide use in agriculture. And even the second generation of pest control, which is putting the pesticide into the plant through genetic engineering. This is the category of crops called Bt toxins, where the toxin is put into the plant, and now the cells are releasing the poison all the time. They are creating super pests, not controlling pests. The 300% higher pest occurrence in GMO Bt cotton in India because of the Bt in the plant than before. And this has huge implications for health. I'm going to be leaving here for the region a book I've just edited. It's called Seed Sovereignty and Food Security, Women in the Vanguard. And the article that I really want the region to translate into German and Italian and circulate among all the organizations that are here is this graph. It's the correlation between growth of autism in the US and the increase in the use of glyphosate, Roundup, and Roundup-ready crops. They've grown together. Center for Disease Control, which is the official data of the government of US, published a report 2 years ago. It used to be 1 in 100,000 children autistic about 25 years ago. 4 years ago, it became 1 in 65. 2 years ago, it became 1 in 35. And at this rate of explosion, 1 in 2 children in the US will be autistic. This is that same gut-brain connection. And the scientist who I asked to do this analysis is based in MIT, and she's worked out the 2 processes by which this is happening. One, that even though the companies tell us that Roundup glyphosate doesn't affect humans because we don't have what they call the shikimate pathway, a metabolic pathway, what they don't tell you is that we as humans are primarily bacteria. We have 600 trillion 600 trillion genes, most of which is bacterial. Only 600 million are human cells. Now, the human cells don't get affected by this poison that kills the plants, which is why Roundup is a herbicide. But the bacteria in our gut have that metabolic pathway, so they're being killed. These are the beneficial bacteria that produce the enzymes and the amino acids that then allow the neurotransmitters to function. So the title is Food in Equilibrium, but the equilibrium also has to be within us. And when our gut bacteria are being killed, our brain functioning is being damaged. According to her, these processes are what need to be investigated. But instead of putting money into these investigations, the money is just put into silencing the scientists who tell us what's really happening with the food system and with our health. Another reason why this is causing hunger is because of its ecological appetite. It's a predatory system on the planet. Industrial agriculture, while it gives us only 30% of the food people eat, 75% of the ecological destruction is taking place because of it. 75% of soil desertification, degradation, 75% and more of water use for irrigation, for an agriculture that's based on chemicals that requires more irrigation. 75% in most countries of biodiversity erosion, but 93% of cultivated crops, their diversity is gone. In intensively pesticide-using areas, the bees are disappearing. And as my book, Soil Not Oil, analyzes, 40% of the greenhouse gases that are destroying the climate are coming from industrial globalized food systems. And this is really just analyzing the data of the IPCC. And finally, because when you've left soils desertified, you've mined the water, you've destroyed the biodiversity, which is your ecological cushion, you also disintegrate societies. you mentioned how the refugee crisis is linked to how we are doing farming. We issued a manifesto on 2nd of May from Navdanya International. We tried to set the tone for the Milan Expo. And the manifesto is called Terra Viva, Our Soils, Our Commons, Our Future, because this is the year of soil. And the team that drafted it had the former Director General of the UN Convention on Drought, on Desertification, and other very, very senior scientists and experts. The big boat had just sunk in the Mediterranean. And that's what forced us to look at the refugee crisis. So we looked at two situations which have become big in the international media. One is Nigeria and Boko Haram, and the other is Syria. Before 2009, go and read newspapers. There was no problem in Syria. There was no Arab Spring, and there was no Boko Haram. 2009, an intense drought aggravates a crisis. Lake Chad, which supported 9 billion people around it, has become 5% of its size because of overexploitation of water. And my research shows that you use 10 times more water for chemical farming to produce the same amount of food. Basically, what you're doing is dissolving chemicals rather than producing food. As a result of which, you have 9 billion people without resources, struggling to fight over the little bit that's left. That's the root of the conflict. And then the world is just waiting to rewrite analysis of why things go wrong from the non-sustainability of our models of development, of economy, of agriculture, into religion as a very easy excuse for everything that goes wrong. So it became Muslim fundamentalists. Syria, 2009 drought, a million people displaced. A violence gets triggered between displaced farmers and the government. And of course, the world's waiting to send more arms to the Middle East. And now there's a war no one knows anymore who is the enemy. I was just reading in the newspapers today, while flying over, that the intelligence agencies of the US are telling the military, stop lying to the people, you have no idea what you're doing in Syria. You have no idea what's happening with the ISIS. You have no idea where the bombs are going. You have no idea where your arms are going. This is the basis of why today 11 million people are now seeking survival somewhere else. But they are a combination of ecological refugees, climate refugees, war refugees. And what we need to be thinking about is how do you create systems of living with the earth so people can nourish the land, find their livelihoods, and through that make peace. And the means are there with us. The agriculture I've been promoting and practicing through Navdanya, which is biodiversity intensive, ecological, small, because most farmers of the world are small. Most farmers of the world are women, something most people forget. Those farms actually are more productive. They need to be defended. So we've done a study where we measure nutrition per acre, not yield of commodity per acre. Because obviously yields will be higher in a monoculture commodity producing land. But nutrition is higher in a biodiversity farm. And we could feed 2 times the world population if every place we grow food also became a biodiversity sanctuary, where the butterflies and the bees thrived, where the microorganisms in the soil and the earthworms thrived, where the pest-predator balance was rich. That is how we produce more food while reducing our ecological footprint. And this is the reason I started this campaign on Gardens of Hope. First, because we've lost 300,000 farmers to suicide after this model of agriculture became intensive since WTO and globalization. 300,000, all because of debt. Now the government tries to cover it up every day. They have a new story. Last week it was they were having love affairs, and this week it is because they have mental health problems. But that it's an economic model of the way you produce food at very high cost, get farmers to debt. The prices of commodities are falling, Farmers can't break even, and that's the basic reason of the crisis. So I started Gardens of Hope with the widows. Then we went into schools. Now we plant Gardens of Hope wherever we can. This is what I'll be doing in Paris. Because not only is ecological agriculture the biggest solution to hunger, it is the biggest single solution to climate mitigation and adaptation. With organic matter returned to the soil, you can build up to 2 tons of carbon per hectare. That's very easily doable with organic farming. 2 tons per hectare on all the land we farm around the world would pull out all the excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the 10 gigatons that needs to be pulled out. The science is all there. But it also tells us that we've got to stop thinking of some large areas in the Midwest of the US as suppliers of food grain for the world, which was the thesis of globalization. Stop producing food, buy grain from somewhere far away. First, because they're not producing food. Second, because of climate change, their own situation is unstable. Third, because those are commodities that don't nourish us. But there's another reason. And industrial agriculture has become the single biggest reason for displacement, uprooting, and poverty of small farmers, especially in countries of the South. And so we did a calculation, and interestingly, our agriculture minister has written the foreword of this book. We call this one wealth per acre. We took the externality of chemical industrial farming for India. It's $1.2 trillion annually. 1.2 trillion. The destruction of soil, of biodiversity, of birds, of animal poisoning, etc. On the other hand, when we save our seeds, and that's the partnership we have with the region of Bolzano, you save your seeds, you have your biodiversity, you do ecological agriculture, and you shape fair trade relationships so markets don't exploit the farmer, farmers earn 10 times more than in a commodity producing system where they're dependent on buying seed, buy chemicals, and selling to whoever will buy, which ends up usually being a monopsony, a single buyer. I could give you examples of how this shift takes place, but I want to just give very quick ones. Now, you're such a beautiful land, you're such a diverse land. I'm sure you eat bread. You do, don't you? I didn't see a single wheat field. So quite clearly, someone far away is growing monoculture chemical wheat for you, and then you're importing it. And no wonder there's a rise in gluten allergies, because uniformity of wheat is the single biggest reason for gluten allergy, because the same molecule is attacking your system all the time. The minute you have diversity of wheat, the gluten allergy goes. And this has been experimented again and again and again. So I would suggest one very concrete issue that can develop out of this conference is, it isn't just India that needs seed banks. Create a seed bank for your staples and start creating food circles. Doesn't have to all change at the same time. Begin with 1 bakery and 2 farmers, and expand to 10 farmers and 5 bakeries, till you really have bread liberation. And you're not just focusing on vineyards and apples loaded with toxics. And I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to support the initiative at Marlis to be toxic-free. But I think the autonomous region of Bolzano will prove its true autonomy when it starts to ban toxics in agriculture across the board, beginning with Roundup. That's an easy one. It's carcinogenic, it's giving autism, there's nothing good about it. Very, very important beginning to go. The beautiful thing about practicing the right kind of agriculture is it allows you to do your duty with respect to the earth. That's the smallest we do. It's our rent for being alive, taking care of the earth, of our biodiversity. It is health care. That's where real health comes from. It's climate care, it's water care, it's democracy care. And it is literally the place where we grow communities, we grow life, and we grow freedom. Being conscious about how we grow our food and what we eat is no longer a luxury because we have two clear choices. One choice is we will have food, we will have life, we will have freedom. The other choice is if the system that's providing only 30% food has destroyed 75% of the planet and it starts to supply 45% of the food, we're going to have a dead planet. There's no life on a dead planet. We owe it to ourselves as a species, to this earth that has been so generous to us, and to future generations, to grow life in a deep way through the way we cultivate good food. Thank you.